Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the first dev server for the upcoming update titled Winged Lions. I say first as there are still many vehicles today that I have not examined, which I will during the second dev server. A lot of the content on here is still unfinished and I will indicate if they are, so I'll take all of this with a grain of salt. The US tree currently has 3 new vehicles: the XM975, the USS Wilkinson DL5, and the F105D. The XM975 is a regular tree SPAA at 10.0 placed before the ADATs. This is a single prototype on a modified M109 chassis used by the US to evaluate the Roland platform on a self-propelled chassis. The program was eventually shut down and the XM975 was never fielded. In-game, the XM975 has the same ammunition choices as the Flak Panzer I Roland and the French Roland 1, with the Roland 1 missile stock and the Roland 3 upgrade at Tier 2. Supposedly, the XM975 should have a longer range search radar, but so far the XM975 is a direct copy of the German and French Rolands. The XM975 is good and bad if you look at it from two perspectives. The XM975 is great because it gives you a proper SPAA between 10.0 and 11.0 now that the 11.3 BR is going to be a thing. However, for those who are just looking to build a top-tier lineup, the XM975 is another roadblock to the ADATs. Personally, I have no qualms as I already have the ADATs and I welcome more vehicles to pad out the trees. However, I just wish it was more unique than a Roland repost. Now let's move on to the USS Wilkinson. There's not much to discuss, it's just a premium variant of the USS Mitscher in the regular tree. Both are in its 1950s refit with the access to the weapon Alpha. I've dabbled in some naval, but I'm way out of my depth when it comes to the nuances that goes into it, hence, I'll leave it at that. The third and final vehicle to be added on the first dev server is the F105D. Finally, the Thunder Chief. Placed after the B-57, is placed at BR 9.7 with AIM-9E as its best air-to-air weaponry. It can utilize both variants of the bullpup and has access to CCRP for bombing runs. It's got a 20mm M61 with 1048 rounds, which I think is great. It doesn't have access to the guided munitions of Tier 7 aircraft, which is fine. It's a more traditional bomber which a lot of players would enjoy at 9.7. The first in Germany's roster is the Flusy-1. The Flusy-1 is an anti-air boat with an 88mm flak in front and some 2cm flak veerlings in the rear. There's nothing really that stands out with the Flusy-1 other than its name being Christian the Great. I'm not going to dwell anymore on that. Now we move on to the next vehicle, the DF-105. The DF-105 is a weird hybrid between the Jagdpanzer Cuirassier and the Marder, leading to this weird combination. It has the same shells as the MX-30 with only 105mm heat round and some HE rounds. It rounds out the 7.3 lineup with a heat chucker on the Marder hull. Now for the cream of the crop of the German vehicles this iteration of the dev server, the Scharnhorst. The Scharnhorst is perhaps the most recent battleship added to any tree in War Thunder. However, since I have no idea about battleship gameplay, all I can provide are on-paper comparisons. The Scharnhorst has inferior guns compared to most of its contemporaries, sporting a 3x3 283mm gun turrets, when other BBs are on 12-inch and 13.5-inch guns. But that's all I can really say. It's got better belt armor than the Hugo, but then again, in-game I wouldn't have any idea how it plays against it. With the Scharnhorst comes a new feature, the Hydroplane. You can launch an Akado AR-196 from the ship and use it as a scout and a smokescreen deploying aircraft. According to the developers, more full planes are coming this update so that not only Germany can enjoy this feature. The USSR has 3 vehicles for this update. The first one is the 2S3 Akatsiya. The Akatsiya is a 152mm self-propelled artillery gun on the Object 120 hull. It has 4 shells, which are 2 kinds of HE, a variable time fuse HE, and an armor-piercing shell. It is also capable of utilizing night vision devices. Honestly, I love the Akatsiya. The inclusion of self-propelled artillery has been on everyone's minds already, and I think this is a good start. Although, I wish it started with World War II artillery pieces like the Sexton and the Vespe, but I guess this is how they want to do it. It has an upper vertical limit of 60 degrees and a maximum gun depression of -4 degrees. Par for the course for most self-propelled artillery guns. Though with a reload of 13.7 seconds on Ace Crew, this isn't quite the assault gun as one would wish it were. The next vehicle is the MiG-27K. An upgrade of the MiG-27M, the MiG-27K is the same in every way except for an improved laser rangefinder similar to the Atlas II with no thermal sight. The MiG-27K is now able to drop the CAB 500L laser-guided bomb, and the KH-25ML and KH-29L missiles are guided more efficiently with this new laser rangefinder. It has the same R60Ms and BVP-5060 chaff flare dispensers on top of the fuselage. It goes directly after the MiG-27M. So now, let's move on to the vehicle I am most disappointed about, the Su-22M3. The Su-22M3 in the USSR tree is the Hungarian Air Force Su-22. Recall my Italian strike aircraft video where I listed it down as a possible aircraft for Italy because the TOLD-2A is already in the Italian tree, and Gaijin did say that the minor Axis nations like Hungary will be added under Italy. With the Su-22M3, not only is it not in the Italian tree, it's also a squadron vehicle that's better than the Su-17M2 in the tech tree. It has 6 hardpoints for R60s and chaff and flare dispensers. It also carries a new type of rocket called the S-25. Comes in 2 variants, the unguided S-25O and the laser-guided S-25L. The Su-22M3 is better in every way than the Su-17M2, and the fact that it's a squadron vehicle pains me to no end. I've never liked squadron vehicles because of the way you can just buy it off in the end. And now wasting a really good aircraft that Italy can use for a USSR squadron vehicle is just pain. Oh well. In this iteration of the dev server, the Brits only have one vehicle, the Seafire LF Mark III. Based on its performance and engine, it performs in between the Spitfire F Mark IX and the Spitfire LF Mark IX. I've always loved the Seafires when I was still new to War Thunder, the Mark 17 being my favorite, so I can't really hate this edition. Unfortunately for the United Kingdom, that's about it for now. We can move on to the next nation, Japan. Japan has really taken the cake this update, but unfortunately that means it's nearly done rounding out its tech tree. For this update, Japan receives the legendary JDS Harukaze. It was Japan's first indigenous post-war destroyer. Fitted with 3 5-inch guns and 2 40mm Bofors guns, it sits at 4.0 and Tier 2 of Japan's Blue Water Fleet. Haha, gotcha. I'm just kidding. The real legendary addition to the tree is the Type 10, the final MBT in the Japanese tech tree. The Type 10 sports a 4-second autoloader and a very low weight of 44 tons. It can fire the JM21A1 shell, the JM33 shell, and the eponymous Type 10 shell with 613mm of penetration at 100 meters. However, people are getting Type 10 syndrome with this vehicle. While the armor setup is definitely not final and subject to improvement, I mean, look at it. It barely has any armor modeled at all. But this doesn't stop people from being very disappointed with the Type 10's lackluster armor. This is perhaps born from the idea that the Type 10 ought to have at least better armor than the Type 90, which is a misunderstanding of the design philosophy of the Type 10. The Type 10 was built as a supplement to the Type 90, as the Type 90 cannot be used in any other part of Japan aside from Hokkaido, as it is too heavy for Japanese bridges. The Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force ought to have a supplement that will considerably be lighter than the Type 90. The Type 10 achieves its bare weight of 44 tons by utilizing modular armor that can be attached and removed to fulfill operational requirements. In short, the Type 10 should be no better, if not slightly better, in the armor department than the Type 90. The autoloader can hold 14 rounds with 2 rounds in the ready rack and 6 in storage for a total of 22. Personally, the Type 10 is a very welcome addition, and I'm glad that the Japanese players can finally use this tank in game. One can only hope that C4I mechanics and tanks can finally be added in order to utilize the Type 10 at its fullest. China's air tree is once again taking a backseat, as its only addition is the LA-11. The LA-11 originally came in the USSR tree as a premium pack vehicle. Now, the LA-11 is in the Chinese tree as a tech tree vehicle at 5.3. Not much to say about it, but it marks another entire year that China has gone without its promised helicopter tree. Oh well. Italy's edition is an interesting one. The VCC-8060 is one of those Dardo hit fist prototypes, but this time it's the 60mm gun from the AU BLHVG. Aside from the obvious differences in platform, the 60mm HVG on the VCC-80 is fitted with the proximity fuse HE round. It turns it into some sort of baby automatic. With thermals and a 2-second reload rate, the 9.0 BR is more than justified for what it can do, and I bet it will go up even more. I'll omit the Seafire for France as it is an exact copy of the British Seafire LF Mark III only with a different skin. Let us move on to the Leclerc Series 21. The Leclerc Series 21 is the third Leclerc for the French tree and is perhaps the most armored among the three. Although the armor differences are very minimal, the Series 21 has marginally more armor. But in the grand scheme of things, all three are basically the same. All three have no commander thermals, same shells, and the same armor layout. It's just a move to place the French top-tier ground lineup on par with the big three with 3 top-tier MBTs. With the Swedish Air Force being graced with great additions in the past few updates, the Sweden takes a step back and settles for the Bandkanon 1. However, there is nothing middling about this artillery piece. It's a 155mm gun with 1 HE shell that can overpressure anything at its BR with a 3.2-second autoloader. The only downside is it does not have a fully rotating turret. Among all the additions in this update, this is one that I appreciate a lot. Bandkanon 1 is so interesting and special that I can't help but be drawn to it. I might even enjoy it. Personally, I enjoy vehicles that aren't very conventional. Sure, you can have the Leclerc, the Type 10, but they all play the same way as other tanks. You just point and click. Meanwhile, with the Bandkanon, you have this huge HE shell that you can sit from behind and just throw at enemies. I will probably enjoy the Bandkanon 1 a lot. And now, finally, at last, Israel. I'll go about the most interesting vehicles for Israel instead of going down every vehicle. I'll start with the Nisher. The IAI Nisher is an Israeli-built Dassault Mirage 5 that became necessary when France enacted an embargo against Israel. Essentially, it's a Mirage 3 with no radar. Although in-game the Nisher's properties are copy-pasted from the Mirage 3, which is why the game thinks it still has the Serrano IBIS search radar. Supposedly, the Nisher can fire Python 3 missiles, but in-game it can only fire the Shafir 2, the AIM-9D, and AIM-9G as its missile loadout. Notably absent from the Nisher are guided ordnance. All of its ground attack ordnance are currently unguided rockets and bombs, which makes it less capable in the air-to-ground role than the A4 Skyhawks and F4 Phantoms in the same tree. The F4E in Israel and US now have access to the GBU-15 guided bomb. Using the same electro-optical guidance as the Walleye, the GBU-15 is a 2,000-pound bomb as opposed to the 500-pound bomb that is the Walleye. Aside from this, the Israeli F4E is the same as the F4E in the US tree. Just swap out the AIM-9J for the AIM-9P. Another interesting aircraft for Israel is the Meteor NF-13, which is the Meteor Mark 8 with search radar and guns in the wings. The search radar is a nice addition, and the NF-13 is a unique aircraft that I wish the Brits got first. Although, now that we have a night fighter Meteor, the British can now have the Australian Meteor NF-11 that tested fire flashes in Woomera. Next up is the Aweebia S199, which is a BF109 G10 with a Jumo 211F engine in lieu of the DB605. The engine is slightly less powerful than the G10 with the DB605, and the S199 starts out with a 13mm gun rather than a 20mm MG15120 in its upgrade. I like this S199 as an interesting offshoot of the BF109 that everyone has grown to love, or hate, in War Thunder. Next up is the Sa'ar. The Sa'ar is one of the 2 Super Mystere variants in the Israeli tech tree. The other one is the Sambad, which is called as such, as it is a reading of the acronym SMBD, which stands for Super Mystere B2. While the Sambad is the same as the French Super Mystere, the Sa'ar is an upgrade of the Super Mystere to fit the Pratt & Whitney J52 P8 engine. You can tell by the exhaust of the aircraft. However, what I'm disappointed about is that the tree doesn't include the Kefir C7, which was an Israeli tree dev blog. The Kefir C7 is an interesting addition because it's a Mirage 3 with canards and a pulse Doppler radar known as the Elta Systems ELM 2021. However, it's not present in the Israeli tree, which leads me to believe that it will be added in the future along with missing entries like the Mirage 3 CJ. There's a lot of potential for the Israeli tree than what is currently added, and I hope Gaijin capitalizes on this. So that's it for the first iteration of the dev server. There are many hidden vehicles that will show up in the second dev server, which I will discuss when the second dev server adds them. Currently, my thoughts on the upcoming update is that it's a nice end cap for the year 2021. We had a lot of nice toys this year, from the South Africans to Tier 7 aircraft and now a new nation. This update is good to end the year. The updates we had this year lends credence to what we can look forward in 2022, which I hope Gaijin delivers on. On the other hand, Gaijin had its fair share of issues this year that I hope gets rectified in the next year. And hope that in 2022, War Thunder decides to improve upon itself even further. This is the Dr. MD. Aweebia.